Hey everyone, David Herbst here with Americans for Prosperity, Montana. I'm here with Michelle Feldman, the state campaigns director with the Innocence Project. Michelle has came all the way from New York to Montana to work with us on criminal justice reform issues. The Innocence Project and AFP Montana are working together on a couple bills, and she was going to get her expert opinion on a few things. So thanks for coming on and talking with me.
Thanks for having me, and I'm thrilled to be in this beautiful state. This is my favorite state that I travel to in the country. It's one of my favorite places, so I'm glad to be back here.
Awesome, it's good to have you. So the Innocence Project, what is it?
So we're an organization, I work at the national project, and we have local projects across the country, and what we do is we take cases where a person was innocent and wrongfully convicted and work to exonerate them. And then we work on reforms that prevent and address wrongful convictions, because we want to put ourselves out of business, and we want to make sure that, you know, innocent people don't get sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit.
So I recognize the name only from Making a Murderer.
Right.
So and we talked a little bit about this before. Yeah. So what can you tell me kind of the role you played there, and you know kind of what lessons people might be able to draw from that case? Or?
Sure. I mean, so Making a Murderer, Stephen Avery was exonerated by the Innocence Project of the original crime. It was kind of a classic witness misidentification case, and you know, for whatever you think about the subsequent crime that happened, it shows how many flaws there are in the criminal justice system and all the potential to get things wrong. I mean, it's a human system. People make mistakes, and we have to be ready to address those mistakes.
That's right. So how did you get involved personally? Like, where'd you come from? Like, how did you wind up with this job?
Sure. So I was a government dork before working here, and I loved working. I worked for the New York State Legislature and the City Council, and I really wanted to make this transition to the Innocence Project because I just read case after case in the newspaper about exonerations, and there was just this one case that really struck me of these two men. They were 16 at the time. They came home and found one of their mothers and sisters had been murdered, and instead of being treated like victims, they were treated like suspects, and they went to prison. DNA then revealed decades later that they were innocent. So that just really compelled me to take action and get involved.
Wow. And that was when you're in college or after college?
That was after. That was a more recent, last few years that case came up. We've been having lots of wrongful convictions overturned in New York in the past couple of years, so it's been, I think, on a lot of people's minds.
And is that primarily a witness thing, or new witnesses, or is it mostly like a hard evidence DNA, things like that?
I mean, usually so a very small percentage of exonerations actually have DNA. A very few number of cases, actually, only 10% of criminal cases involve DNA. I know that, you know, CSI has people thinking that there's, you know, a perfect DNA profile that can solve everything, and that just doesn't happen. I mean, most crimes, it's not biological material at all. So we've been starting to deal with more non-DNA cases, but initially we were only dealing with DNA exonerations. But there's a whole other, so 80% of exonerations in the U.S. involved non-DNA evidence, and actually that's one of the bills that we're working on together, because it's something that we need to ensure people can get back to court if they have non-DNA evidence. Sometimes it's a real perpetrator that confesses to the crime. Sometimes it's new scientific evidence that debunks, you know, old forensic evidence that was used to convict someone. We were talking about bite mark evidence that used to be thought of as a real science, and that you can say that the bite mark on a victim definitely comes from this one person to the exclusion of all others. And we've seen wrongful conviction after wrongful conviction being overturned where that was the claim. So we want to make sure that, you know, when there's new developments, people can get back into court.
Wow. So it's incredible to me to see the progress of science and being able to be an asset for the courts, but there's some responsibility for the courts to, of course, when they're wrong, redress that. So that's the retrial process. So what is that normally, and then what are we trying to change in Montana? Montana to make the adjustment?
So in Montana, basically there's a part of the law that says that if you have new non-DNA evidence, you can file a motion to get back to court, and the court, either the court can grant a hearing and see if you have some merit to your case. And there was, from 2006 to 2015, a pretty normal standard that's used throughout the rest of the country. You had to show, just to get a hearing on your case, you show, I have new evidence and there's a reasonable probability I wouldn't have been convicted if I had it at my trial. Then in 2015, the court raised that standard and said you have to show definitive evidence that you did not commit the crime just to get a hearing on the merits of the case, which is a catch-22 because
it's much higher standard.
Yes, exactly. So it's really made it hard for wrongful convictions in Montana to even get a hearing, and for there even to be an assessment about is this new evidence legitimate and what does it mean, in light of all the other evidence.
So it's just not taken. It has to be much more clear up front for the court even to hear it at all.
Exactly.
So we'd anticipate that in Montana, as compared to other states, we don't hear as much trials, as many retrials as we might otherwise if we had a standard that was more reasonable.
I mean, it's a different process actually, so it gets a little complicated, but when we had this standard that we're trying to go back to, it didn't cause an increase in the number of petitions or anything like that. I think after the court said the standard changed, that really resulted in a lot more litigation and a lot more time served unnecessarily for our clients. Like Cody Marble was exonerated of a rape that never happened. He was in a juvenile detention facility on a marijuana charge, and the other inmates came up with this scheme that they were going to say that he raped another inmate, totally made up, and they were going to use that to try to get a sentence reduction in their cases. And they told, they created this whole story, and years later, the case completely fell apart. The victim admitted he made that up, that it never happened. Victims, the witnesses started feeling guilty and, admitted we made this up just to get, a sentence reduction. And even the district attorney said that the charges should be dismissed because it's just, there's no case anymore. But because of this confusing, convoluted law, he spent an extra 3 years in prison.
Wow.
And that cost, we estimated to cost about $85,000 to Montana taxpayers, keeping, an innocent person in prison for something he didn't do. So we need some clarity to, when somebody gets that new evidence, you would think, all these victims, the victims recanted and all these witnesses admitted they lied. Well, he must be out of prison the next day. And instead, it took years to get through, the bureaucracy and the bad law.
So we have one bill that kind of hits on one side of that, the incentivized witness bill, and then we have the other bill, more about the evidence. So the incentivized witnesses, so that's a great example of that.
Right.
You got some people who, have it out for someone else, and so they collude and, mutually testify against that person. And then they get their sentences commuted for doing that. And in this case, we have somebody who was in jail for a pretty petty victimless crime, marijuana. And then the person who got the sentence commuted.
Right.
What were they in for?
So Cody Marble, he was in for a marijuana offense, and the first witness, so-called witness to the crime that never happened, that reported it, he actually was in there on a murder charge, and for some reason, makes no sense to me, the prosecutor decided that this person should be reduced to a misdemeanor, a homicide charge, and he was released from prison. But Cody Marble then spent 14 years in prison for a crime that never even happened. So there's it's not just about protecting, innocent defendants when we're talking about incentivized witnesses. There's also a real public safety angle, because if the state thinks that somebody's bad enough that they need to go behind bars, and then they're giving them a sentence reduction to get them to testify in other cases, what happens to the victims in their cases? What happens to the harm done to them? It's not fair to them. And what happened to that original informant in Cody Marble's case? He was released and went on to die in a shootout with police. So he just kept creating more harm. So it's really, everybody should be concerned about this issue because there's a real threat to safety.
So, and for so many people, we recognize that incentives matter, that people respond to the incentives in the system they're in. And if you're in a system, based on punishment, and you got a way to get your punishment reduced, you're going to respond to that incentive.
Right.
And lie potentially, and then in the worst case scenario, lie. And maybe a lesser scenario, maybe just bend the truth a little bit and misrepresent what actually happened. And what we're going for with justice is representation of truth with a witness as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it was just too easy for a lie to put Cody in prison for over a decade, it's like, what would you say to get out of jail? People have said all sorts of things. Can an incentivized witness's testimony be reliable? I'm sure in some cases it is, but you're taking a big risk. If you're dangling drop charges or a sentence reduction, in some cases they're paid money to provide information, you're taking a big risk that there's going to be lies involved.
So, and then on the on the evidence side, for a retrial, can you kind of run us through?
Sure. So really, it's just bringing back clarity to the law in Montana about when you can get a hearing when there's new non-DNA evidence of your innocence, and it also clarifies that new evidence the court should consider new science that undermines old forensics. That should be considered new evidence. So we call it junk science. It's all kinds of disciplines we now know are not reliable, and DNA has proven hair comparisons, bite marks, arson, all these cases that the person that we thought did it because of expert witness testimony that turned out to be not scientifically based as more research was done. We have to let those cases get back to court, and then also it just kind of sets the standards for if new evidence that hasn't been disclosed to the defendant by the prosecutor, so has been illegally withheld. We just kind of codified what the courts have already said here. So we're just trying to really be crystal clear with the courts, what the standards are, because otherwise there's just been a lot of inefficiency in the court system. Cody Marble's case went up and down from the district court to the Supreme Court and back, and it costs everybody time and resources, and it's just not fair to keep, the only person that wins when an innocent person is in prison is the actual perpetrator. I mean, in Cody's case, there was no perpetrator because the crime never happened, but nobody wins when, an innocent person is stuck in prison.
Yeah, that's right. So, and for us, so much of our engagement in the CGR space is we've identified that there's this barrier for a lot of people to re-enter society and be productive members when they get out.
Yeah.
And not to mention, and it's even worse when someone is innocent. I mean, can you imagine the resentment that you might feel towards the system that you live in?
Right.
If you're innocent and you're serving time.
Yeah.
So making things as easy as possible for those people to get a retrial if new information comes up. It seems like a no-brainer.
It should be. I mean, we want the other person that we're going to have testify tomorrow is Richard Burkhardt, and he was exonerated of murder in Great Falls, Montana. He also had an incentivized witness who got, testified against him, and in exchange got a plea bargain where he just got time served and he was released after. And that wasn't disclosed to, the prosecutor didn't disclose that to Richard's defense team, so they couldn't bring up these issues of credibility and reliability to the judge and to the jury. So I think his case really shows transparency. We're not saying don't use incentivized witnesses. We're saying we need more transparency and we need more protections if we're going to use them. And then, on the back end, Richard, he was exonerated because there was a police report found in the prosecutor's file that was illegally withheld from him that a different person confessed to the crime. And he was able to get back into court because he met the standard there that would create a reasonable probability of it, that he wouldn't have been convicted if it had been introduced. But under this new stricter standard that the Montana Supreme Court implemented, we don't know if he would be granted anything.
Because it wouldn't be considered new evidence because it was submitted as evidence.
And also it's not necessarily airtight evidence of innocence, because you can say, well, this is a hearsay confession, and you can, there's a million ways to kind of
come with the argument. That's what we pay lawyers to do, is to come up with that argument.
Exactly, and to not even grant somebody a hearing when you have pretty compelling new evidence. It's really rare that we find smoking gun evidence that says there's no way this person could have committed the crime. I found this videotape all of a sudden of somebody else doing the crime. That's just really rare. We usually have pieces of evidence that show the person didn't do the crime that come together. But to set this standard that you need airtight evidence that there's no way the person could have done the crime, it's just not fair.
Yeah, that's right. So we are really excited to work with you guys. We are really excited to work with the ACLU on criminal justice reform. It seems like there's so much space here.
Yeah.
And for me, as a guy who got involved in a lot of government issues, from everything from foreign policy to immigration to just tax and spend, meat and potato issues that AFP is so well known for, it's really cool for me to get to know new people like you and all the great folks that are working in this space. But it's fascinating to get down at the federal level in the First Step Act.
Yeah.
Now we've got the work we're doing here in Montana. We've got work on all the states all across the country that are doing similar things. What is it about the criminal justice reform space, since you've been here a while, and I'm the new guy at the party, that is just opening up this area for dialogue that doesn't seem to be anywhere else?
I think there's just been a recognition that it's broken. It's not working. I think there was, at a time, an overreaction, and now we're seeing it's not the best outcomes for anybody, for the victims, for, the families who are impacted. Prison's not necessarily, the best solution, and certainly for taxpayers who have had to foot the bill. So I think there's been kind of just a new mindset of what can we do that actually rehabilitates people, and what can we do to ensure we have more integrity so that the real people that need a timeout get that timeout, and the people that don't need that, get some other treatment. I think it's kind of people are just opening their eyes to see that it's too many people in prison, and to the point that it's counterproductive to public safety.
That's really, So, and we're excited with this partnership. We really believe in a quote from Frederick Douglass that says, "Unite with anyone to do good and no one to do evil." And that's our motto, especially this year, is finding those places where we agree with people and come together to get good things done. I'm so happy to have you in Montana. Thank you for jumping on.
And we're so grateful for your help. It's going to be so important to have you all on our side. So thank you.
And if you want to get involved, you can go to americansforprosperity.org. You can go to afpmontana.com. Check out our Facebook pages and stuff like that. We've got iVolunteers up for folks to be able to engage in this issue and let their local House and senators to know what they think about these bills and what we're doing with criminal justice reform. So any way they can follow the Innocence Project?
Sure, our website is www.innocenceproject.org, and you can find the link to our Facebook and Twitter and all that other good stuff.
So we're coming at you from today at 1889, who let us set up here because we don't have an office in Helena, and we're so thankful for these guys. Great coffee, great food, and really appreciate their letting us have the space. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.